So this is an excellent question, and I would like to use the past to investigate potential prologue. So the question is, if it's currently undetected H2H, meaning H5N1, is that better than if it's not? The flu season is very bad, but not nearly as lethal as HPAI has threatened in the past. What changes about outlook if it's driving this? And here's what I have to say. We know because some states are actively looking that even if H5N1 is going human to human, it's still not doing it well, or more of the Sentinel labs would have detected it. But I want to point out some of our history in terms of what might be happening. So if you've seen more of my videos before, you know that I have alleged that COVID was circulating in the United States at earliest October of 2019, but definitely by the time we get to Thanksgiving of 2019. And that part of what a terrible flu season that was in the headlines in the news in 2019 and early 2020 was hiding was in fact the early spread of COVID. And that COVID likely was mutating during that time towards more lethality, which is why we see a sudden spike in deaths by the time we get to February and March. But I think a lot of the deaths that we started to see towards the beginning of 2020 were actually COVID-19 hiding, because we have never required a flu diagnosis to have died from the flu if you had flu-like symptoms. In fact, even today, the death statistics that were just released for flu deaths in the UK, only half of them had actually had a positive flu test, which also means some of those are probably COVID deaths, but I digress. So let's start with this paper, which has this awesome graph looking at changes in positive flu cases and reported influenza-like illness. And in the spring of 2020, before we officially knew COVID was happening here, they diverged from one another. Influenza-like illness started going up, but positive flu cases actually started going down, which meant that when our case count was in the hundreds, we likely already had millions of infections. Or this one that looked at the outbreak of COVID at Mardi Gras. Their estimation based on the genetic diversity of patients from that outbreak indicate that it occurred several weeks before Mardi Gras began in Louisiana, likely seeded from Texas and spread throughout the country in the weeks following, seeding a lot of the cases that started in the South. Or this one, which found that 2 of the earliest recorded deaths, both in California, shared a lot of the same genetics as those that originated on the Grand Princess cruise ship. So again, likely seeded earlier than other known cases. This is from early reporting in the New York Times. Even back in 2020, we suspected that we were missing cases. But my favorite is this one, looking at the genomic clock, aka genetic mutations, in various known samples of COVID from different populations. Just like looking at 2 different people that you know are related, you can guess how far back that relation is and where it came from based on what percentage of their genetics they share. And based on their cluster analysis for the US, they put the earliest case jump as early as September of 2019, but no later than November 3rd, and no later than December 23rd for a different cluster. So again, much earlier than we thought it was. And that was true in most of the clusters that they looked at. From their conclusion, the spread of the virus from likely China to almost all countries across the world occurred in the period from the autumn of 2019 before the actual discovery of SARS-CoV-2 virus to mid-February 2020. And there was an exponential increase in the effective population size of the virus, hence why we suddenly see an explosion of cases in March. So all of that is to say, I would not be surprised if there is early beginnings of human-to-human transmission hiding underneath a bad flu season. I hope not. But I fear is. Because we already know that happened very recently with COVID. It was circulating for weeks, if not months, before we actually even knew what was happening. And headlines like this from January of 2020 were actually signs of a growing COVID problem. But that's where my brain goes. Which is why I will be continuing to mask for the foreseeable future. Because COVID or flu, RSV or cold, I don't want any of it. And masking in an N95 or KN95 is the thing that I can do to protect myself.